In this problem, we're asked to solve the equation 3y squared minus 10 equals 13y. Well, the first thing we have to do is figure out what type of equation it is so we then know how to solve it. So looking at the variables, I have a y squared. That's the highest power on the y's. Here it's y to the first power. So because I have a y squared, this is a quadratic equation. And one way of solving quadratic equations is by factoring. So I want to take a quick look at the steps we use in solving a quadratic equation by factoring. The first thing we need to do is write it in standard form. That means I need everything on one side and 0 on the other. So looking at our equation here, is it in standard form? Do I have 0 on one side of the equation? No, I have 13y over here. So what I'm going to have to do is subtract 13y from both sides. That will give me my 0 on the right-hand side. And now if I look at the terms on the left-hand side, I have 3 terms. They're all unlike. So I can't combine them, and I want to write them in descending order. So I'm going to write 3y squared minus 13y minus 10 equals 0. So now I have step 1 done. I have it written in standard form. Now what does step 2 say? Step 2 says factor. So I'm going to factor it using the AC method, comparing it to this equation here. A is the coefficient of the y squared, so A is 3. B is the coefficient of the y term, that's negative 13. And C is the constant, negative 10. I need to figure out what AC is. It is 3 times negative 10, which is negative 30. So I'm looking for 2 numbers that multiply to negative 30 and add to B, where B is negative 13. So I'm looking for 2 numbers that multiply to a negative. That means they're opposite in sign. And since they add to a negative, it means the bigger one has to be the negative. So let's do this systematically. I'm going to start with negative 30 times 1 is negative 30. And then I take negative 30 plus 1. Those add to negative 29. Definitely didn't work. So does 2 divide into 30? Yes. So I have negative 15 times 2, which is negative 30. Negative 15 plus 2 is negative 13. Is that what I'm looking for? Yes. So these are the 2 numbers that I need. So what I'm going to do, remember those aren't the factors, that's what I'm going to rewrite this middle term here as. So I'm going to write 3y squared minus 15y plus 2y minus 10 equals 0. So instead of a negative 13y, I have negative 15y plus 2y. The reason I do that is now I have 4 terms that I can factor by grouping. What do the first 2 have in common? Well, I definitely have a 3, since 3 divides evenly into 3 and 15, and they both have a y. So I'm going to factor a 3y out of 3y squared. It's going to leave y. Factor a 3y out of negative 15y. I'm going to have minus 5. Now bring down the middle sign. And what do the last 2 have in common? I think they have in common a 2. So I factor 2 out of 2y. It's going to give me y. Factor 2 out of negative 10. It's y minus 5. Now, is this binomial the same as this one? Yes, that is my common binomial factor that I can factor out in front. And what does it leave behind? 3y plus 2. So I have now factored. And now we have to set each factor equal to 0. That is the reason we got 0 on one side, because if two numbers multiply together equaling 0 and only 0, then one of those numbers has to be 0. So we set each of our factors equal to 0. And then the last thing we do is solve each resulting equation. So I'm going to add 5 to both sides here. So I get y equals 5. And on this one, I'm going to subtract 2 from both sides. So 3y equals negative 2. Divide both sides by 3. And I get y equals negative 2/3. So here are the two solutions for my quadratic equation. We do not have to check them since I started with a quadratic equation, but if you wanted to check them, you could take y equals 5, plug it into the original equation, and see if you get a true statement. Then you'd plug y equals negative 2/3 into the original equation and make sure you got a true statement for that.